welcome to the Soulful Eclectic. I'm your host, Diana Collins, and I would like to welcome you guys back to this episode. If you haven't joined us before, thank you for coming and listening and being a part of the Soul Tribe. If you have listened before, I want to say welcome back and thank you so much for giving me your time and sharing a part of you with me. Today, I have with me a friend of mine, Chris Studenka, who is an actor. He is from Michigan but lives here in Arizona now. And if you're interested in his IMDb, he's got IMDb cred. But I want to talk with him today about himself, being his authentic self, and how he, started this journey on, bettering himself, running marathons, being an actor, model, and things of that such. So thank you, Chris, for being a part of the show. All right, so Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I thoroughly appreciate you spending your time with me. I know you have so much more you can be doing on a Saturday.
Well, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome. I really just want to talk about you and how you became your authentic self. You're an actor. I read your IMDb, and you've been out there. I think we had a conversation 4 or 5 years. You started acting.
Yeah.
But reading your bio, you've been playing with the film for a while.
Yeah. In a silly way, but yes.
You're Stumar Enterprises there,
right.
Your label there. So just in case you thought I wasn't paying attention, I was paying attention. What really intrigued me to actually have a conversation with you was when we first met and we did the whole Joker scene that we were recreating, right? And you had your running journal.
Yes.
And, even though I'm focused trying to do our scene, I'm like, wow, he's running this and he's running that. So I'm mentally, calculating that. And honestly, that is one of the things that really started me running and picking that up. And I hate running. I'm a military girl. And, those 2 miles used to kill me. So it was a challenge, definitely, to even do that. And I still can't run a full 1 mile completely without stopping. But, it's getting better. It's getting better. But so thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
Just for further clarification for those listening, when we did that scene, we needed a prop notebook. And I'm an avid runner, and I brought in my running journal just so it looked like a notebook that Diana had to continually look at. So she learned far too much about my running than she ever cared about. But that's what she's referring to.
Yeah, so that was quite the day, right? But yeah, so we, definitely, I think that's what really, made that connection for me. I was like, oh, he seems like an interesting guy, kind of guy, right? But honestly, with us and what I like to talk about, what actually brought you to start becoming your authentic self? Because, we all started this journey. We didn't always be, some of us, and anyway, didn't always be our authentic self. So how did that journey begin?
Well, I think that's a loaded question, of course, obviously, and you can certainly point me in a direction because there's a lot of layers to that. I think with everybody, there's so many layers to life. I grew up in Michigan, very blue collar, auto industry. Everybody works at the plant. Literally, they made Cadillacs across the street from my high school. It was a factory a mile, literally a square mile. It was right across the street from my high school. And back in the day, they said you graduate Saturday and walk into General Motors on Monday.
Wow.
And work on the line the rest of your life. That was a real common thing in Michigan.
Wow.
Just wasn't the life I ever wanted to lead necessarily. Nothing wrong with it, but I had a really wonderful childhood, 2 loving parents and 2 older brothers, and really nothing outrageous in my childhood. It was pretty standard.
Right.
Then I went to college, but I got married, met my ex-wife. Well, we'll get to that too. That's all part of the layers. In college is where we met, and got married as soon as I graduated. So I got married very young and started my working career, and so did she. She not yet finished school, so she was going to school college while we were first married, and took our lives on a whole different path of things. When we moved a few times and all of that, and did not have any children. That was a challenge in our life where we found out we couldn't. That's another layer of my life. And so went a long ways and was married 17 years, and we were together almost 20, and then unfortunately we got divorced. And that, all of a sudden I'm 40 years old and really alone for the first time in my life, because I went from being at home to college to being married. So I was never alone in my life, and I moved out to Arizona, took a job, and it gets real long-winded, so you can pick the points where you want me to elaborate. But then, so my parents, God bless them, are still married 54 years, happily. And I'd say happily. That's an important distinction.
Yes.
A lot of people are still married.
Yes.
My parents are happily
I'm glad
married.
you said that, yes.
And my grandparents, my mom's parents were married 67 years happily, and my dad's parents were 60 years happily, and we lived close by. So I had those role models in my life, and was a part of that my whole life. And so I was the first grandchild to get married, and then it ended in divorce. I felt a great deal of shame.
Okay.
Not from anybody in particular, nobody, but that's how I felt. I felt like I was letting everybody down. Nobody said that. No one ever even intimated that, but that's how I felt.
Now,
felt
why
like
did you
a failure.
feel that way?
Because I think, in my family, everybody was married. And they had stayed married, and I couldn't make it work. And we did a lot to try to make our marriage work, and it didn't. And it felt like a real failure. And I think part of that, like I said, my childhood was pretty nondescript, wonderful, but not filled with tragedy or loss or those types of things. And so I really hadn't experienced any real setbacks in my life.
Okay.
So, even up to 40 years old, and that sounds unrealistic, but I mean, I had some great-grandparents die, and when my grandparents did, they had lived long, productive, healthy, happy lives, and it was sad, but it wasn't like they died at 50 or too young. So I really hadn't experienced any really strong trauma in my life, thankfully, of course. But then when the marriage failed, and I felt a real failure there, and I moved to Arizona. I took a job and moved out to Arizona, 2,000 miles away, and part of that was to run away. And a lot of my family knew and friends. I had traveled to Arizona. I traveled a lot for work in my life. We grew up going to Florida because my grandparents lived in Florida, wintered in Florida, and so I grew up, and I always had dreamed of living somewhere warm. My ex-wife didn't want to; that she wanted to stay close to family. So, in some ways, this was my chance to do it because now I was single and I could. And why wait till I retire to move somewhere warm? But a biggest part of that was that I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment. Like I said, nobody put that on me. It was all self.
We do a lot of self-harm, don't we?
We all do. We're our own worst critics and all of those things. And so I moved here, and it was really, really difficult. I also think, just, shortening it, we can get into whatever you want, like I said. If I hadn't moved here, I think it would have taken me longer to get past it. Because when you're married and with somebody happily, we were happily married for so many of those years. And it was such a wonderful relationship for so much of it, that even though it failed, it was difficult. That was a loss. Because there was no smoking gun as to why we got divorced. There was no hatred. It was just a sadness that we were at different points of our lives and wanted different things at that point. And that was a huge loss, and not one that I wanted, frankly. And so I really suffered, a lot of it self-brought, but I came out here and I had to do everything for myself, which again, I went from college to being married forever. So it sounds so simple, but I never cooked because my ex-wife loved to cook. And we were a great team. We did so many things together, and now, going out to eat alone, I'd never done that in my life, or living alone and having to do everything on your own, just survive your regular life, all those things. And
so you have to rebuild you as
an
individual.
And I think that I was saying all of that gets me to what's my authentic self. It changed to all of a sudden, at 40 years old, I didn't have to do anything.
Right.
But I think if I had stayed in Michigan, I had so many people that said, stay here. I had a friend that said, come live in our house. They had like this mansion, literal, and so you could stay in the bottom half. It's all yours, separate entrance. And I thought about all those things, but I think if I had stayed there, I would have been too close to the situation still.
Mm-hmm.
That moving this far away, 2,000 miles away, made me expedite the process in some ways. Some ways that hurt, but I think overall, now that I look back, I think it's the best thing I ever did, because I love living in the warm weather and and everything, and it was, yes, I had to rebuild myself. Part of that was running.
Okay.
And when we separated, I moved out here when we were actually separated, when the paperwork was filed. So we were apart before I was officially divorced, and I had raging insomnia, just raging insomnia, and it was all stress and all of those things, anxiety and depression and all of that.
Okay.
Not clinically diagnosed, but just.
But
Yeah. And I had a friend, and I couldn't sleep. Mm-hmm. And I used to run in high school and in college, and I had but hadn't for years at that point. And I had a friend who said, well, maybe you should just run and just burn off some energy and pick that up again. And I did. And this is the part that's kind of interesting. It's like I was running every day, and if I felt stress, I would go out and run again, and I was running nonstop. If I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd go and run, and I was running almost too much, where it was unhealthy. Mm-hmm. Yes, I wasn't going to bars or getting drunk or dealing with pills or anything else, but I was still not dealing with anything. I was literally, I see all this now, not at the time, of course, that I was literally running away from everything so I wouldn't have to sit home, because when I sat home and it was quiet, because now all of a sudden it's just me, it was very quiet, and you have to think about stuff that you don't want to think about. And I would just run out the door. When you have to finally learn to do it, and you don't have anyone else to bounce it off of or to be there for you or with you, and because there's the phone and stuff, and that's helpful, but it's not the same.
No.
And, so I had an unhealthy addiction to running that put me in great shape. But again, even something positive like that, it was unhealthy in some other ways.
Yes.
That sort of changed who I am too, because the other part of that, you say authentic self, that's such a challenging statement, because my whole life to that point, I had lifelong friends, which I still do, and family, and everybody knew me as married and happily married. And I moved to Arizona. I didn't know one person. And the entire time I've lived here, everybody here has only known me as a divorced guy that runs all the time. I didn't do that. I was neither of those things in Michigan.
So you created a whole new you, or you started showing a part of you that was there, but
without intention per se. But yes, it occurred to me after a while. I was like, wow, some people never even ask if I was ever married. They just assume so it's just, I thought, gosh, I could be whatever I want.
Yeah. So how did that feel? Trying to, know that you can create a whole new you because you're in a whole new spot. And now there's two questions, right? How does it feel knowing that you can create a whole new you, right? Because no one knows you. And how at this age does it feel to have to, or you don't have to, but to meet new people and build those new friendships?
That's probably the hardest part, is how do you meet people and become friends with people. That's not an easy thing to do no matter where you are. You move into a new city, you don't know people, and even if you meet someone. So I was very, very fortunate, just serendipitously. I was running. I moved here, and Saturday I went running down the canal banks here, and I was running, and then another guy was running next to me. We're similar age, you could just tell by our looks, and we just, like a lot of runners, when you run, you come across others, and you run with them for a bit or whatever, and we struck up a conversation and we started a friendship very, very loosely at that point. But thank God for him, because we were done running. 99.9% of the time, you just go your separate ways. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to go climb Piestewa Peak tomorrow or next week or something with some other friends if you want to go." And I had nothing else to do, so I was like, "Okay, maybe I'll join you."
Right.
And that was it. But I did join him, so I had to then, because part of me was like, you know, nice guy, but whatever.
Right.
But then I did call him, and I met the group, and we did Piestewa Peak, and then Greg is his name, and Greg grew up here in Arizona. It became the best thing ever for me because he was born and raised here in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
I was brand new, literally a week in at that point.
Mm-hmm.
He knew everything about Phoenix in Arizona because he'd lived there his whole life. We were a similar age. But the point of making friends that I'm getting to is that he had two kids, like preteen and teenager. So he had a busy life. So it's like I was always free. It's like, "Hey, you want to go do this?" He's like, "Nope, can't. So it wasn't like we were friends, but we weren't best buddies right away because his life was very busy in other ways. So that's where it's hard to make friends at a similar point in life where you can share in the same way. Mm-hmm. Since then, his kids have gotten older over the years, and we are really, really great friends. But initially, it's not that simple. No. And you're still sitting home alone, like with nothing to do. It's like, well, do I walk around the library? I mean, what do I do? Because I'm very Catholic, and I would go to church, but you go to mass and you leave. It's not like you're walking up and down the aisle saying, "Hey,
how you doing?
What are you doing tomorrow? Who are you? What do you?" It's a hard thing to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
When you've never had to. I knew my wife forever. We had both of us had lifelong friends forever. That was all of our group. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like I had to meet people over the years. If we did, great, but it didn't matter if we did because we had so many other friends already built in. So it wasn't like we didn't meet new people, but it either happened or it didn't. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter because we had a group. Out here, I knew nobody, literally. And I had to do things that I wouldn't normally. It took me a while to get to that point, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I had to do things I wouldn't do, or maybe, like I would never go hike a mountain with a group. That's just something. It just isn't me. Right? It wasn't
right.
Me.
It wasn't you, but you had to get out of yourself.
But I did it, and that's so. My authentic self. I don't know. If authentic is even the right word. We're always still evolving, right?
Constantly.
I mean, where I am today, I might not be in 10 years. Probably shouldn't be, right? In some ways.
Right.
But you do have to sort of recategorize your life. In my circumstance, I had to recategorize everything. Mm-hmm. My wife and I had both worked in higher education at universities. She was a professor, and I was in the administration. And after I took a job out here, and then I don't know when it hit me. It wasn't that long, but I was like, well, I don't need to work at a university anymore. I did kind of because she was getting her PhD, and we would move so she could get a job because I always could at a university. Mm-hmm. And I got to thinking, well, I liked it, but it's like, well, I don't have to do that because I was looking for another job, and I was like only looking at universities, and I thought, well, I don't have to do that anymore. I like it, but it's not. I don't have to be pigeonholed. Mm-hmm. So it just. I think I had to have enough confidence, even in my states of depression or sadness, they were in there, to allow me to do that. Not everybody has that.
No.
So it's harder for some people, and you learn that. And you think, oh, it's easy for you. Okay, but that's not everybody else. But thankfully I had that to sort of push me in different directions. So that's where the acting came in because, as you mentioned, my brothers and cousins and I made some films when we were kids, but that was just my parents or grandparents. I think it was my grandparents had this old 8mm camera with no sound. And when we would always get together all the time, they would just send us kids either in the basement or outside, just get away. Don't come in until it's time to eat.
Yes.
And so we were looking for things to do, and we had this camera, and we started making these silly movies like James Bond spoofs and stuff you do when you're 10, 12, 14, or whatever we were, little kids. Mm-hmm. They're all horrible, but they were fun at the time. Uh, I wouldn't call that acting, but we would create
It
sort of
was creative.
we would create stories and props, and so we would
Right.
sort of go through the motions, if you will. But I did not act in high school or college or any like ever in my life, so that wasn't part of who I am. But I guess there was a creative piece in there somewhere,
Absolutely.
but never looked into it or attempted it really in any real way till recently. So
How does your vulnerability play a part in that? You know, you have to be vulnerable to open up yourself to new adventures and things like that. You mentioned the level of confidence it takes in yourself. Did you always have that confidence?
I would say I had a level of it that's inherent. I'm very much like my grandfather, who was very confident in himself, but not in an overt way necessarily. But early on in my work career, I had a lot of responsibility, thankfully, and I'd always presented. I was like the presenter, and I was in front of a lot of people,
Okay.
a lot of CEOs and prominent people, even at a young age. And if you're in the front of a room with those type of people, if you act unconfident, even if you are or scared, they'll chew you right up, or they won't pay attention, or they won't listen.
No.
Or they certainly won't buy what you're selling, so to speak. So
Right.
I had to learn right away that to be sort of not abrasive. That's not my nature, but to be confident, and it's like you're right in front of that room for a reason, and really believe that. And buy into it. And if they don't agree with it, so what? It's easier said than done. It make it sound so simple, but I had enough of it in me, and I did that for so many years.
Gotcha.
But I also think the tumultuous nature of my divorce and the rocky road that had it the last few years in so many ways brought me to depths of emotion that I had never felt and made me more vulnerable than I'd ever been in my life. And as an actor, you need those things. And so if I had really tried to act when I was 20 or 30, I wouldn't have had any of that life within me at that point. And I guess anybody that's that young that can act that way, that's when you know somebody's truly talented, because they probably haven't experienced so much.
Right. Right.
I can draw on it. I have that ability to draw on it, but only because now I've experienced it in the last 8 years. If I hadn't, I don't think I'd be doing any of this. But all of it started because I put myself out there too. I modeled for sporting goods catalog, running shoes and running gear, and even going out for that audition was ridiculous and silly to me, because that was nowhere near any part of my life. And I had a friend, and she suggested that I do it, and I was like, no. But this was years ago, and it's still part of like, well, maybe sometimes you have to do stuff just for life experience or just to do something different. And I thought, well, that would be a crazy story just to even audition for something like that. And it's like, whatever.
Right.
And then they picked me, and then they used my photo in the catalog, a couple of them, and then that's where it all started, because they cast that catalog like a movie.
Oh, wow.
It was a casting company, and that casting company started calling me in for commercials after that. And the first time they called me, and they said, "We'd like you to come in for a commercial." And I was like, "Well, you met me. You know I don't act." They're like, "Oh, no, you can do it." It's like,
"Oh, you can do it."
But again, so here's another one of those points. It's like, I could have said no. I did the catalog and the modeling and got paid really well. And I could have just thought, oh, that's a fun story and nothing more. But they called me in for the commercial, and I thought about it. I said, well, what the heck? Why not? And then I did that, and they kept calling me back for commercials. And then they were casting a movie here in Arizona, and they asked me to be a part of that. And so that's where it all started. But then it was like, I sort of enjoyed it and realized this is something I'd never thought of.
Right.
But I have some sort of talent. I'm using air quotes for those listening. Whatever that was at that point, because I kept getting booked in gigs with no background or experience in that way. So I figured, well, I got some. I'm tapping into something.
There's a part of you
somehow.
Right.
And so I started to push. That's where I'd say I made the personal choice to push and really go and audition for lots of things that I had no business even auditioning for. But I also viewed that as I went after it hardcore, like almost academically. I studied very hard on my own, read millions of things, read books, studied, prepared myself like mad.
Okay.
Because when the first couple of auditions I went on, I didn't know what the heck they were saying, and they would tell me to do things. I didn't know what they meant, and I would look like an idiot. I'd look like an unprofessional, and I didn't like that feeling.
Yes.
It's like, if I'm going to do this, I need to know what I'm doing in the room.
Absolutely.
So I approached it very academically and studied and prepared, and for whatever reason, this is where the confidence comes in. Like I said, I was in front of people and presented my whole life, so auditioning was not scary to me, which is one point. I was not nervous in the least. It was always like, well, I'll do it, and if it doesn't happen, so what? My life is fine without it. I'm not. So I was never nervous in auditioning, and I think that comes across obviously to people doing these auditions. You've met so many of these actors and actresses go in, and you see their bundle of nerves, and they probably can do it, but they can't get out of their own way.
Yeah, I'm one.
But you're not alone. And it doesn't mean I wasn't nervous at times, but I've been in front of the room, so to speak, so many times it wasn't a big deal to me.
Right.
Or this person's opinion of me, it was like, whatever. I mean, they don't like me? What? Okay. What's that mean?
Well, that's a great way to be, because that's the hardest thing to do. Because we talked about how we get in our own way. And that is one of the main ways we get in our way, because we say we can't be ourselves. But honestly, when we go to things like that, they want us to be us.
Yeah.
But we automatically want to put on a facade because we want to show them what we think they want to see. So you approach it that way, like head on from day one.
I did. I always have, yeah. I think that's just from my background. And it's like I said, I couldn't have done that at age 25 or 30.
Right.
That I could at 40. Because I have a lot of life experience of doing that in a different avenue, but doing that where it wasn't an issue for me. And for whatever the reasons, the commercials in the first movie I did, I had a very tiny role. And I was watching, these sets, you sit on them all day long, and I was watching one of the lead actors really struggle with his lines, and by the time they finally called him up to do it, I mean, I was like, I knew his lines, because he'd been struggling with it for so long. And it just made me think, well, I can do what they're doing, and I'd rather not sit here all day and give one line. I can do just as much as he can. Now, why I thought that or believed that, we could dissect me and figure out biologically. I don't know. But I had the belief that I could do it with no background or training in that vein. I thought, well, I could do what he's doing. I could give that emotion. And so I started only applying for like lead roles or main roles and things. Mostly because I didn't want to sit around a set all day and just do like one thing. I was like, well, I'd rather be a big part of it. But I think I can do it. Gotcha. And that's up to somebody else to believe that too. But in my mind, because there's a lot of people I think, well, but you've probably met other actors that would never apply for maybe the lead in something. Oh, I can't be the lead. Well, why not? That to me, it was like, well, why not? Why do I want to just be a secondary person? Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I don't know. I was just, and it wasn't an ego thing. It was just like, well, I think I could do it, and it would be more fun to do it.
And you believed in yourself.
And I believed in that.
Yeah.
Without maybe all the how we got to that point. And again, running gave me a lot of confidence too, because it changed my body, it changed my mindset in a lot of ways. And when I've run a lot of marathons, when you train and run that many hours, you have a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
You run for 3 hours on a Saturday. That's a lot of time to yourself.
Oh
And you
yeah.
learn, I think that's how I learned to be with myself as much as living by myself, is that I was out running. And your mind gets, it's really crazy when you first start. For like the first, even today, for like a half an hour, my mind's full of a million things I got to do. But then at some point, it just, all that goes
Shuts off.
away. And you learn how to be with yourself.
Learning to be with yourself, that is powerful because many of us do not know how to be by ourselves or be alone or be, let alone be alone with our own thoughts because that could be a good and a bad experience depending on the individual, right? And when they are in and where they are in their life, right? To be left with your thoughts. I know I'm thinking of myself being by myself would be a different experience. I've never been by myself. I always had, a partner, my kids. So I've never really had a real opportunity to be by myself, but I can definitely understand how that can be a positive thing and also a challenging thing at times. So it really depends on the individual and where they are in their lives, where they are in their relationships, and where they're trying to transcend themselves to be. So um, my conversation with Chris, really didn't end here. We just chose to pause at this point and, we definitely continued our conversation, but I wanted to stop there for just the listeners to take in what Chris was talking about and, healing and discussing his running and how that affected him, his acting, and just coming into himself again as he transitions in life, as we all do. We evolve, we transition, we change as we grow. So with that, I just want you to sit with that, ponder with that, and see if anything that was talked about resonates with you or something that you can connect with, right? And then join us again when we do part two with Chris as we start to talk deeply about his healing process, seeking counseling, and talking with members of the church, and continuing that work of being himself, that continuing the journey of healing, because it just doesn't stop there. We talk often about how things in our lives sometimes, there's triggers that trigger us, and it's nice to get the male perspective on things that happen in their lives because a lot of men don't talk about these things. So I appreciate Chris for coming on and sharing himself, right? As most men don't like to do. But I want to also thank everyone who has been here, who's listening to Chris's story. And also, I invite you to come back to hear part two. Again, it's a rare occasion where we get to be a part of a journey, of someone's journey, or hear someone's journey on healing and advancing themselves in their authenticity. So just please feel free to come back and listen to part two as we talk about that part of the journey as well. So, with that, I want to thank you all for coming, for listening. I don't do live shows anymore, but I will come back to doing live shows. But thank you for listening. And also, I encourage you to give me your feedback. Let me know how um, the story resonated with you, whether it did or it didn't. I like to hear both. Feedback to me is great, either positive or negative. It's feedback. It can only make us better, right? So feel free to email me at dc@thesoulfuleclectic.com, or you can reach me on Facebook, DC Soulful Eclectic. You can also reach me on my webpage, www.thesoulfuleclectic.com. But I also ask, please don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast. And I just look forward to hearing from you all. And part two will be coming soon. Namaste.